According to Masterclass, in order for a movie, for a story to have a good ending, it should have four of the main elements: a resolution, an ending must always wrap up and resolve the central conflict you laid out in the beginning of a story. The audience should walk away with the feeling that the story is complete. Transformation, a story's ending should bring a powerful close to your character development. The main character has learned valuable lessons along the way, and the ending should illustrate their transformation. Suspense, a story's ending is intensified when there's a moment when the main character might not succeed. That last minute tension makes the ending more satisfying when the main character overcomes their obstacles. Surprise. Audiences follow a character story to be entertained. Satisfying endings have an element of surprise. Predictable endings will make a great story fall flat. So, one of the main things that, as I'm becoming a director, that I've learned has always been start with the end in mind and then build your story backwards. For some people, the idea is start the story forward and then let the ending come to you, discover it as you go. So everybody has a different way of writing. But one of the main things that I've been having challenges with for the past few years is when it comes to movies, mostly the endings are always good. Mostly there's you're either left with wanting to see part two or you're left with satisfaction. I think Avengers, Infinity War, and even Endgame, for me, gave satisfactory endings. Those are movies that come to mind when I think about good endings. A series that I watched that had a good ending was Power. For those who, if you watched, I think Power ended at season 6. I think it had a good ending, which set up the future shows and spin-offs and all those, which for me was satisfactory, good endings. But there are series that were disappointing. A series that comes to mind is Game of Thrones. I didn't like the final season. It felt rushed. It didn't satisfy. We were building up. It's like we were building up to the end. And when we got there, we were not really given much. And it was disappointing for many reasons. But from a storytelling perspective, it just felt rushed. It felt disappointing. It felt like, the Night King was built up to be this crazy, crazy, crazy villain, and we only got him for like 2 episodes, and he didn't do much. It was just a battle, and it's dead. And part of that battle, we couldn't even see what we were watching, if I remember well. And then recently, I was watching The Blacklist. This has been one of my favorite series for the past decade, and it was so disappointing the first time, when Elizabeth King died, where you were like, okay, where is this thing going to go now? Because from what is being built up to for what it felt like we were going towards, it's not what the story is about. And then you also understand that the actor didn't want to be part of it anymore, which is understandable. Those are curveballs. And then the guy who started it was no longer part of it at the end of it, and you have those issues. But then the ending is not satisfying. The part of what made the mystery of Raymond Reddington throughout the series was always about who is he? Is he Katerina Rostova? Is he somebody else? When the bones were discovered and it was not him, what is his secrets? What is it? Felt as if, for me, over the 10 seasons, was we were trying to discover who Raymond is by going through his past, and all these members of the Blacklist, each member gave us a clue into who he was in terms of his operations. And in season 10, whilst we got glimpses of how his operation ran and how he got his information, we were never given much about who he was. Dembe in the final season is like, oh, Raymond used to spend a lot of time in France going to Spain. But that doesn't give us that satisfactory ending. And the way it ends with him dead, where you're like, oh, come on. like for real, he's killed by a bull. Like, and I feel like there's this laziness that exists within Hollywood. Granted, this is shot in New York. There's this form of laziness whereby they're not trying to give you a satisfactory ending. They're not trying to wrap it up and answer the questions that we've asked for the past 10 seasons. And it's not satisfying. It's like, okay, which is very disappointing, because I think with something like The Blacklist, when it's going for 10 seasons, I think you can properly plan it out and deliver on those promises. Who is Raymond Reddington? Who was Elizabeth Keane? What did she mean to him? And we are left with questions that are unanswered, like what was their relationship? And for some reason, it almost feels as if you want to forget about it. It's not something that we'll be talking about many years from now. Like, hey, you remember about this part about Reddit? Because it also felt as if the series kept on going for far too long than it was welcome, and it never really got us to the climax, and it never really got us to understand the stacks and everything that made it special. And I think there's such a big problem with a lot of these series whereby these people do not actually know how to end them, how to satisfactorily end a series and give the audience a good goodbye. Like, you've loved these characters for a long time, and here's the satisfactory ending. And I don't know, because these people are well paid writers, these people are well paid producers, these people are people who I'd assume know what they're doing, but ultimately it often feels like they don't. I remember watching a series on Netflix called Dear White People that just ended, and you're like, was it canceled? What happened? Like, what's the conclusion of your story? And this is a big challenge that a lot of these people have with Game of Thrones. I understand that the writers wanted to move on, people wanted to move on from the project, so they ended up destroying it. But it's just not fair. It's not fair for the audience. It's not fair because we have a trust, and we have this transaction that we're having, that if I'm watching your story, if I'm watching your movie, you're taking me from point A and you're going to lead me at point B. One of my favorite writer directors when it comes to movies is Christopher Nolan. How his movie is secular. We start from point A, we go around the journey, and we come back to point A, and it's like, wow. And then we leave the theater and we're satisfied, which is something that I think, like I said, with movies, I get it, but a lot of times with series, it's just lacking and it's just disappointing. Let me know in the comment section, which series do you think has a good ending? I haven't watched Succession, but I was told it has a satisfying end, which is something that I look forward to in movies. Like, I'm not one to enjoy being like, if you're gonna leave me on a cliffhanger, yes, but don't do as the Blacklist did. Like that was just disappointing.